wife, she's a beauty. I told her I was seeing a psychiatrist. She told me she was seeing a psychiatrist, a bartender, and 2 plumbers. I'll tell you, Doc, I'm like the rest of men in my family. They weren't smart, they were dumb. Well, my Swiss uncle, Gunther Dangerfield, he got a job as a yodeler. He forgot the lyrics. Yo, yodelay, hey, you. I tell you, Doc, the whole thing goes back to my childhood. I remember. My mother and father got divorced. There was a custody fight over me, and no one showed up. Well, after that, I had a rough. But for 4 years, they sent me to a child psychiatrist. The kid didn't help me at all.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, None Braver Wednesday, March the 13th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and None Braver. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now a new segment called Cars.
Did you know you can buy an old Rolls Royce for less than the price of a used Hyundai or Kia? And this is a genuine Rolls Royce that's probably worth $5,000 to $7,000. It's got wood all the way across the dash. Everything you touch is wood, leather, or metal. It even has its original owner's manual, in this case from 1978. These incredible leather reclining seats. And the luxuries continue in the back seats, where it has genuine footrest. It's incredible amount of space back here, and of course the brown on two-tone paint. Now, why is this car so cheap? It has a 6.75 liter V8 that Rolls-Royce describes as adequate. Well, it's because these cars are incredibly expensive to maintain. People say that new cars are simply way worse value than old cars, but that's just simply not true in some cases. This is a 1998 Chevy Tahoe, and I have the original window sticker for it right here. When this SUV was brand new back in 1998, it cost $37,244. But if you factor for inflation, that's the equivalent of $66,800 in today's money. So what would the equivalent brand new Tahoe with these same options cost today? I went online, I spec'd a red one with the V8 and auto four-wheel drive and heated seats, and the final number came to just under $68,000. So apples to apples, the new Tahoe is about $1,000 more when you factor for inflation. And for that $1,000 more, you get 5 more airbags, you get Apple CarPlay instead of the basic radio, a digital gauge cluster, dual zone automatic climate control. The equivalent new Chevy Tahoe has 100 more horsepower and gets 4 better MPG. It has a 10-speed instead of a 4-speed, and it can tow more than this old one. And once again, all of that for the equivalent of $1,000 more expensive. The Ford Model T has 3 pedals, and none of them work like you'd expect them to. The right pedal, well, that's actually the brake. The gas is up here on the steering wheel. You move this lever down, and that's what revs up the engine. The middle pedal, which is a brake in a normal car, well, that's actually reverse. So if you push in on it, the car will start moving backwards. This is your clutch and your gear selector. It's like a motorcycle. If I push it down, that's first gear, and if I pull it up, that's second gear. And then this is your handbrake on the left, which basically stops all the action. In case you're wondering, this is actually an optional accessory. This is a 2-speed rear differential. How weird is that? This is one of the most reliable cars ever made, and you're never going to guess what it is. Let's see if you can guess. So first of all, enormous white steering wheel, a beautiful set of simple gauges. So clearly it's an older car, maybe something with some luxury because there is wood across the dash, not a lot of controls or dials. Now I'm sitting in a Mercedes-Benz, but not just any Mercedes, an old Mercedes. Now, of course, some of the newer ones have a reputation for not being super well made, but back in the 70s and the 80s, these were some of the best built, longest lasting cars in the world. In fact, a Greek taxi driver drove one of these Mercedes over 4.6 million kilometers. This is a brand new 1989 Toyota Camry with 169 miles. Not 169,000, 169. This car was never sold. And check out the perfect condition. This burgundy dash with the plastic stitching. These big, chunky buttons and sliders, and the working radio with power antenna. Some of the worst, most useless cup holders I've ever seen. And one of my favorite features is back here. You've got a button here to change the power mode on the transmission from normal to power. And look at the indicator. Very 1980s up there on the dash. But by far my favorite feature is the seatbelt. When I open the door, the seatbelt electrically slides out of the way, and when I close the door, it slides back. How insane is that? Now, this Camry, the second generation, is one of the most reliable, well-built cars of all time, and you never see them in this kind of condition because they all typically have 1 million miles on them, and this car has the 4-cylinder engine with 112 horsepower. It looks brand new because it is brand new. An absolute time capsule that has come out of the Toyota collection here in Texas.
Got them when they were crazy, so just wonderful cars, wonderful. I think the best overall car, you know, I've driven all the European stuff from the 30s. Used to think, oh, it was so much better than the American. No, can't even compare to the Duesenberg. I mean, you can drive that 75, 80 on the freeway. It's like a normal car. It's probably one of the few cars from the era you can drive. Because every single Duesenberg was built in 1928. I mean, it took 10 years to sell them off because of the Depression. So there's no such thing as a 37 Duesenberg. They're all 1928. Some were rebodied. And whenever the factory sold them, that's what they titled them at. But yeah, they're all 1928. And you realize how advanced it was. It wasn't until the Hemi engine of the 50s that beat the Duesenberg for a power output. So I'd like to.
Bizarre features this cop car has that your car doesn't have. There are 2 ways to lock the rear door. Of course, you can use the key like a normal car, but there's also a super secret lock down here in the door jamb. The overhead light can shine either white or red so you don't lose your night vision at night. Unlike most cars whose speedometer, believe it or not, is off by typically a couple miles an hour, in the cop car the speedometer is certified to be correct, with individual mile-per-hour tick marks all the way up to 160. This Dodge Charger has a tow bar in the back so you can pull stuck vehicles out of ruts and snow. Every Dodge Charger has a floor shift except for the cop model, which uses a column shift. You can shift it manually up here using these buttons, but the reason they do this is, first of all, computers and stuff typically live here, and then cops have a lot of stuff strapped to them, and it's easier to have a column shift for more space in the front seats.
This Hellcat had the craziest burnout at the car meet.
And that was Cars. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Patriotic Shorts.
He heard a voice call out his name. "Hey, Joe, it's me, Bobby." The Joe was Joe Kenneth Dixon, a corporal in the 81st Airborne Anti-Aircraft Battalion. And the Bobby was PFC Robert Kane of the 9th Infantry Division. It was a moonless, cloudless night in January of 1944, and the childhood best friends had run into each other while waiting in line for fish and chips in Oxford, England. Inseparable since birth, the two hadn't seen or heard from each other in over 3 years. Brutal combat in North Africa and Sicily had hollowed out Bobby Kane to the point where he was barely recognizable to Dixon. "I'm not gonna make it," Kane whispered to Dixon through a cracking voice. "I'll get to Germany close to the end, but that's as far as I'll go," he said with a ghostly premonition. Robert Kane would be killed on March 9, 1945, while defending the Ludendorff Bridge from a German counteroffensive. Joe Dixon survived the war, but was haunted by the loss of his best friend for the rest of his life.
Let's talk about making hot chocolate in foxholes.
Hot chocolate. If I'm speaking, eventually, someone is going to say, "Don, do you have any interesting stories?" And so I say, "Tell the hot chocolate." I don't like the hot chocolate, but I'll do it. We're sitting, waiting, nothing happening all day. I said, "I feel like hot chocolate." And the other two guys says, "Well, make enough for 3 of us." We have ration bar, chocolate bars. We dice up that D bar. Did you ever see one? It was a combat bar. Got our canteen water in there and lit some demolition underneath. Beautiful, nice blue fire. We sat and shot in the breeze, watching, keeping our eyes open, looking around. And all of a sudden, you could smell it. It smelled good. Then all of a sudden, I heard a voice, "Hey, Marine, very good chocolatto. You bring chocolatto here." I said, "If you want chocolate, you come and get it."
Don, how long did it take you to heat up a glass of hot chocolate being a flamethrower?
It's the 24th of March, 1944, and 21-year-old Nicholas Alchemade is in the tail gun position of his Lancaster, returning from Berlin. The Lancaster is attacked by a German Junkers Ju-88. The British plane catches fire and starts to go down. His parachute goes up in flames and is of no use. Nicholas has a choice: jump or stay on board where the fire is raging. Being at 18,000 feet or 5,500 meters, both are certain death, but at least jumping, he avoids the fire in his last moments. He chooses to jump without a chute. He freefalls for what seems like an eternity. There's a crack as he hits pine trees and lands into deep, soft snow. Incredibly, Nicholas has survived. Captured by the Gestapo, they interview him, thinking his story is fiction. However, once the plane wreckage is found, they concede his story is true and give him a certificate to say exactly that. He was held as a POW to the end of the war and passed away in 1987.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little motivation.
Long time ago, someone gifted 2 baby eagles to a king. The breed of eagles was very good, and the king had never seen such magnificent eagles before. The king was very pleased with the gift and decided to hire an experienced caretaker for them. After some time, the king saw that both of them were quite big, and now they were looking more fantastic than earlier. The king said to the man taking care of the eagles, "I want to see their flight. You signal them to fly in the sky." The man did the same. Both eagles started fluttering as soon as they saw the signal. But where one eagle was touching the heights of the sky, the other flew for some seconds and returned to the branch where it was earlier sitting, the same branch from where it had started flying. After seeing this, the king felt something strange. He became curious to know the reason for the contrasting behavior of eagles. The king asked the caretaker, "What's the matter? Where one eagle is flying so well, the other one is not trying to fly." The caretaker replied, "Yes, this has been a problem from the beginning with this eagle. It does not leave this branch." Both the eagles were adorable to the king, and he desperately wanted to see the second eagle also flying high in the sky. Next day he announced throughout the state that the person who managed to make this eagle fly high would be rewarded with heavy prizes. After the announcement, many intellectuals and knowledgeable persons came and tried to apply the knowledge they had to make the eagle fly high. But no one was successful. Even after the passage of a couple of weeks, there was no improvement in the eagle. It used to fly a little bit and then return to its branch. The king too lost hope and almost gave up. Then one day something strange happened. The king saw that both of them were flying high in the sky. He could not believe his eyes and immediately called the caretaker. The caretaker informed the king, "Yes, the second eagle is also flying high in the sky. One man has been successful in making the second eagle fly high." The king asked the caretaker to bring the person who had accomplished this feat. The next day, he was brought before the king, who was eagerly waiting with the promised prize. The king came to know during interactions that the man was a simple farmer. After offering the gold currencies as his reward, the king said, "I am very pleased with you. Just tell me, how did you do this, which the great scholars and highly qualified people could not do?" The farmer said, "Your Highness, I am a simple farmer. I don't have knowledge like scholars. I just simply cut down the branch on which the eagle had a habit of sitting. As there was no branch, it had no option but to fly, and it did that very well." You see, the eagles in this tale represent us humans. Each of us has incredible potential, just like those majestic birds. But sometimes, we're like that one eagle, stuck on our comfortable branch. The simple farmer who made the eagle fly high represents the power of change and stepping out of our comfort zones. He didn't possess scholarly knowledge or fancy tools. All he did was cut that branch. In our lives, the branch can symbolize our comfort zones, those safe and familiar places where we tend to stay. But true growth, like the eagle soaring high, often happens when we dare to venture beyond what's comfortable. So, the lesson here is pretty clear. If you want to reach new heights, you might need to cut some branches in your life. These branches could be old habits, self-doubt, or even fear. It's about taking that bold step, like the farmer, to remove what's holding you back. Just remember, when you let go of the branches that limit you, you open up the sky to endless possibilities. You can achieve great things, just like that eagle soaring majestically in the sky.
Thank you. And now the daily law for March the 13th.
March 13th. Creative endurance. In contemplating work on mastery, I realized it presented quite a challenge. I had known from previous books that near the end of the writing process, I could often become so exhausted that the writing could suffer. I believe many writers tend to peter out halfway through their projects, overwhelmed by the complexity and the lack of organization of their material. I decided to treat it like a marathon and to find a way to build up endurance for the long slog. So I decided to up my exercise routine. I normally exercise every day, but I would increase the times and distances ever so slightly. At a certain point, I knew I would reach a plateau in which I did not feel any more tired with these increases. I would stay at the plateau level for the entire length of the project. In sports such as long-distance cycling, this kind of training helps build up endurance levels. It is better to stay at the plateau for a period of time rather than keep increasing the workout. I wanted to see if this would translate to more consistent energy levels in my work. In the last few months, when the looming deadline made me work even harder than before, I noticed that I was considerably calmer, better able to handle the stress, and that I had reservoirs of energy to draw upon for the long hours. I came to the conclusion that the mind and the body are so intertwined that it is impossible to separate out their effects on us. Feeling energized influences our mood, which influences our work in very direct ways. And feeling confused or disorganized in our work can have a terrible effect on us physically as well. Daily law. Creating anything worthwhile is like a marathon, and you must train for it. HuffPost, November 15th, 2012.
And that was the Daily Law for March the 13th from The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
My question is, if we are all beloved children of God, how could he banish any of his children to an eternity of suffering in hell? Thanks, and God bless.
It's not so much God banishing, like God imposing this dreadful sentence. It's we banish ourselves. That's the tragedy of sin. Sin is a self-banishment, if you want. It's a self-exile from the land where God wants us to live. Hell is a corollary, if you want, of two more fundamental teachings, namely that God is love and that we're free, which means we can respond to that love or we can reject it. If we respond to it, then we have life and life to the full. If we reject it, it lights up the fires of hell within us. It sets up a kind of friction, a sort of spiritual friction. And so who's sending you to hell? It's not God. It's your own will. It's your own freedom is creating, if you want, the conditions for the possibility of this suffering.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day.
What do you think would happen in a disorderly universe?
In a disorderly?
What's the concept of order? What does it have to do with the things which exist? If they clashed with each other, if there were contradictions, they wouldn't exist. There is no such thing as a disorderly universe. Our whole concept of order comes from observing reality. And reality has to be orderly because it's the standard of what exists.
And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
Interpretation. A few months after the defeat at Isandlwana, the British mounted a larger invasion and finally defeated the Zulus. But the lesson of Isandlwana remains instructive, particularly considering the incredible discrepancy in technology. The Zulu way of fighting had been perfected earlier in the 19th century by King Shaka Zulu, who by the 1820s had transformed what had been a relatively minor tribe into the region's greatest fighting force. Shaka invented the heavy, broad-bladed Zulu spear, the assegai, that was so devastating in battle. He imposed a rigorous discipline, training the Zulus to advance and encircle their enemies with machine-like precision. The circle was extremely important in Zulu culture. as a symbol of their national unity, a motif in their artwork, and their dominant pattern in warfare. The Zulus could not fight for extended periods since their culture required lengthy cleansing rituals after the shedding of blood in battle. During these rituals, they were completely vulnerable to attack. No Zulu could fight again or even rejoin the tribe until he had been cleansed. The immense Zulu army was also costly to maintain in the field. Once mobilized, then, the army not only had to defeat its enemy in battle, it had to annihilate every last one of them, eliminating the possibility of a counterattack during the vulnerable cleansing period and allowing a speedy demobilization. Encirclement was the Zulu method of obtaining this complete kind of victory. Before any battle, the Zulus would scout the terrain for places to hide. As one looks out over the grasslands and plains of South Africa, they seem to offer wide visibility, but they often conceal ravines and gullies undetectable from any distance. Even up close, grasses and boulders provide excellent coverage. The Zulus would move quickly to their hiding places, their feet tough as leather from years of running over the grasslands. They would send out scouting parties as distractions to hide the movements of the main force. Once they emerged from their hiding place and headed into battle, the Zulus would form what they called the horns, chest, and loins. The chest was the central part of the line, which would hold and pin the enemy force. Meanwhile, the horns to either side would encircle it, moving into the sides and rear. Often, the tip of one horn would stay hidden behind tall grass or boulders. When it emerged to complete the encirclement, it would at the same time give the enemy a nasty psychological shock. The loins were a reserve force kept back to be thrown in for the coup de grace. These men often actually stood with their backs to the battle so as not to grow overly excited and rush in before the right moment. Years after Isandlwana, a commission laid the blame for the disaster on Durnford, but in reality it was not his fault. It was true that the British had let themselves be surrounded, but they managed to form lines in decent order and fought back bravely and well. What destroyed them was what destroyed every opponent of the Zulus: the terror created by the precision of their movements, the feeling of being encircled in an ever-tightening space, the occasional sight of a fellow soldier succumbing to the horrible Zulu spear, the war cries, the spears that rained down at the moment of greatest weakness, the nightmarish sight of a reserve force suddenly joining the circle. For all the superiority of their weaponry, the British collapsed under this calculated psychological pressure. We humans are extremely clever creatures. In disaster or setback, we often find a way to adapt, to turn the situation around. We look for any gap and often find it. We thrive on hope, craftiness, and will. The history of war is littered with stories of dramatic adjustments and reversals, except in one place: the envelopment. Whether physical or psychological, this is the only true exception to the possibility of turning things around. When properly executed, this strategy gives your opponents no gaps to exploit, no hope. They are surrounded, and the circle is tightening. In the abstract space of social and political warfare, encirclement can be any maneuver that gives your opponents the feeling of being attacked from all sides, being pushed into a corner and denied hope of making a counterattack. Feeling surrounded, their willpower will weaken. Like the Zulus, keep a force in reserve, the loins to work with your horns. You hit them with these forces when you sense their weakness growing. Let the hopelessness of their situation encircle their minds.
And that was the next part of Chapter 19, Envelop the Enemy, from the 33 Strategies of War. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I'm listening to the radio. It's Frank Motek, and every week he has, maybe every day, Dennis Zine, who was a city councilman, and he's still a police officer. He used to be a regular police officer. Now he's reserve police officer. So anyway, so he's talking about, of course, crime. And he describes a situation where an individual, a business owner, had his store broken into, but the alarm caused the individuals to flee. So he calls the police, and the police come out, and then he ends up getting a bill, a fine, because it was considered a false alarm. So, and Dennis Zine says, "Oh, this is absurd. This is absurd." Well, it's your fault. You're part of the union, because that's what this is all about. It's all about union money. The unions are looking for ways for the city to make money so that they can get pay raises. And fines for false alarms is one of them. There was some kind of television special or whatever, news item about years ago about how police officers waste so much time dealing with false alarms. Too bad. That's your damn job. Punch in, do your job. If you don't like your job, then F off and go somewhere else. Make room for somebody who does like the job. But instead, the unions see an opportunity to make money. They say, aha, what if we could get the city council to create a statute that fines people who have a false alarm? Then the extra money goes into the city coffers, and then when we want to raise, we're all set. Okay? The fire department does the same thing in a manner of speaking, except I don't know that you're fined, but what the fire department will simply do, because they were complaining about, all these false alarms, and it's a safety issue. Bull. It's not a safety issue. What it is a money issue. Every time the trucks have to roll, then it costs the county or the city money because they have to pay for the gas and the maintenance and et cetera, et cetera. And so if they have to roll out to a place where there's nothing going on, then they've wasted time and money. And that's money that could be going into the firefighters' pockets. So they came up with this idea where they had the city or the county write up a rule that says that they don't have to go out and respond to any call for service unless there's 2 calls. So, for instance, one time I called in, I saw a dumpster fire. I call 911. I said, "There's a dumpster fire." Give them the address and everything. It took forever for them for you even to hear the sirens start. And that was because my call wasn't good enough. They got to wait for a second call that confirms. Now, this in this particular case, it was a dumpster. I also had the same situation with some property I had that was completely engulfed in flame by the time they got there and was completely destroyed. Because again, they don't want to. They're more concerned about their paychecks and about getting raises than they are about serving the people that they're called to serve. That's the way it is. So Dennis Zine needs to get a grip and remember who it is that runs the city. He also is talking about, if Gascon gets reelected, the LA County district attorney, if he gets reelected, well, then it's time to leave LA County and I just got to blame the voters. No, don't blame the voters. You blame the unions. Those are the people that support Dennis Zine. If the union leadership tell their rank and file to go out and vote for not Dennis Zine, but Gascon, that's what they're going to do. They follow orders. Unions are powerful because they deliver votes. Okay, so don't blame Dennis Zine has got a blind spot for unions, particularly public employee unions. But it's the fact of the matter is that as long as the public employee unions are running the county, as long as that they are collectively bargaining, the city and the county are going to go downhill. It's just garbage. So that's the problem that needs to happen. Stop public employees from collectively bargaining. Make them be regular employees that are on a wage scale, and it solves a whole lot of problems. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from Maria Bartiromo.
PETA has a new target, Jill Biden. The animal rights group is lobbying the First Lady to swap out the eggs used at the annual White House Easter egg roll for potatoes. Yes, PETA's saying a potato roll would be, quote, a truly inclusive and welcomed event by every tot who doesn't eat eggs for religious, cultural, or environmental reasons. No word.
So this is what they always do. They make arbitrary claims. This is the way they start the process because they want to bait you or trick you into trying to prove a negative, which is impossible. And then when you get completely and thoroughly frustrated trying to prove the negative, then you either join their movement just out of frustration or you shut up and go away. So what you want to do instead is make them prove it. You always want them to prove their point. They're going to come up with an arbitrary claim. Prove it. That should be your attitude. There's all kinds of different ways to get them to prove it. One of them is just to say, prove it. Another way is to simply say, no, it isn't, and leave it at that. And then they have to then put up or shut up. But always make them prove their point. Listen carefully. When you hear the left making an arbitrary claim, make them prove it. Back in a minute. Thank you. So a word about the hearings that happened yesterday with Mr. Herr. The word of the day for the Democrats is exoneration, because it's the most powerful thing they can do. They know if they have to explain, then they lose. So what they want to do is come up with a slogan or a word that is going to put pressure on the Republicans. Exoneration then puts the Republicans on the spot. It's a trigger word to get the Republicans to try to prove a negative. Don't do it. One of the best things to do is create a counter word or counter phrase, and such as guilty as sin. And I take that from a former radical who was put on trial, and at the end of the trial, he was exonerated. The jury found him not guilty. He came out to the press conference and said, guilty as sin, free as a bird. So you could use that with Joe Biden. When you go to work and somebody says, aha, the report exonerates him, Mr. Conservative, you can say, shake your head and say, Joe Biden, guilty as sin, and walk away. So don't allow the left to bait you into proving a negative. Proving a negative cannot be done. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, NLP, I'm doing a little bit of research on the neuro-linguistic programming. Tucker Carlson had interviewed the shaman who talked about neuro-linguistic programming as the way that the left hypnotizes people and gets them to do their bidding, so to speak. So I went onto Wikipedia. I also looked for books in Kindle, and there's many books on the subject. Most of them are how-tos, how to use NLP to make yourself a better person. So I figured instead of having to wade through these books and spend a lot of money, better to go to Wikipedia and get at least a basic idea of what this is all about. So I'm going to read from Wikipedia. It's called Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And the subtitle is Pseudoscientific Approach to Communication, Personal Development, and Psychotherapy. Neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, is a pseudoscientific approach to communication, personal development, and psychotherapy that first appeared in Richard Bandler and John Grinder's 1975 book. There's in the 70s again. It seems that very little good came out of the 1970s. The Structure of Magic was the name of the book. NLP asserts that there's a connection between neurological processes, language, and acquired behavioral patterns, and these can be changed to achieve specific goals in life. According to Bandler and Grinder, NLP can treat problems such as phobias, depressions, tic disorders, psychosomatic illnesses, nearsightedness, allergy, the common cold, and learning disorders, often in a single session. They also claim that NLP can model the skills of exceptional people, allowing anyone to acquire them. NLP has been adopted by some hypnotherapists as well as some companies that run seminars marketed as leadership training to businesses and government agencies. There is no scientific evidence supporting the claims made by NLP advocates, and it has been called a pseudoscience. Scientific reviews have shown that NLP is based on outdated metaphors of the brain's inner workings that are inconsistent with current neurological theory, and that NLP contains numerous factual errors. Reviews also found that research that favored NLP contained significant methodological flaws, and that there were 3 times as many studies of a much higher quality that failed to reproduce the claims made by Bandler, Grinder, and other NLP practitioners. And so again, that was the neuro-linguistic programming entry in Wikipedia. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we pick up where we left off with None Braver.
Chapter 3. Boys in the Has. You gonna finish that? Asks one PJ of another, who has a half-eaten Three Musketeers bar on the table in front of him. No, replies PJ Kipwise, the owner of the candy bar. You mind if I have it? Queries the first PJ politely. No, says Kip. Did you spit on it? Asks the first PJ. No, responds Kip. You wanna? Who are the PJs deployed to Operation Enduring Freedom? They range in age from 22 to 46, their time in the Air Force from less than 3 years to 28. They're white, black, Hispanic, and Asian American. There are PJs who are single, married, and divorced, some multiple times. Some are garrulous, a few taciturn. All of them are religious about staying in shape. Just watching them killing flight time in the back of a C-130 by doing pull-ups from one of the plane's structural crossbeams or sit-ups and crunches on the angled ramp can tire ordinary people out. One of the newest PJs, he's been in the Air Force less than 3 years, Senior Airman Adrian Durham, observes that all of them are variations on a theme. Type A. See, that's the cool thing about it. We're all ourselves. We're all Type A personalities. But you got Type A small, Type A big, Type A bigger, all the way up, you know? And Type A small listens to Type A bigger. Durham is 25 years old, divorced, and the father of 2-year-old Seth, upon whom he dotes. While the other PJs at K2 wander off to bed by 3 in the morning, Durham is sitting in their day room drinking canned orange juice. The PJs refer to OJ as free radical reducer, and watching a financial news program on Fox News. He makes no comment on the fact that while he's sitting in a relatively crude quarters in a Haz in Uzbekistan, the conversation being fed to the war zone by Armed Forces Television is all about stock prices and what companies to buy and sell, as the graphic on the bottom of the screen says, the cost of freedom. Durham isn't certain whether or not he's going to make the Air Force a career, or if he does, whether he'd remain a PJ. He knows he's got an aptitude for medical work, and the notion of going to medical school pops into his head on a regular basis. But in the small hours of the morning, he broods over what life would be like if he weren't a pararescueman. I know life won't be as exciting as it is now. Our everyday life is jumping out of planes and doing high adrenaline rush stuff. It'll never be the same. When I look at life now, what makes it great is the guys I hang with, no matter who they are. We can go anywhere and make a shithole seem like heaven, and that's just because you want the best for yourself. Life in the war zone is already fucked up, so why make it any worse? Try and make it better. Adrian's biggest fear is that if he makes the leap to the outside, he'll be someplace where people don't understand him. Everyone understands me here. They think I'm weird, you know, but out there it's all different. It worries me in a way. How do you let it go? It's hard to let go, and I know I'll never find it anywhere else. Staff Sergeant Kip Wise, a 28-year-old from Pasadena, California, who stands 6'3", 215 pounds, is on the same wavelength as Durham. There have been times where I've thought, this really sucks today, but I think this is by far the best job in the Air Force, for enlisted at least. We do just about everything. We parachute, we scuba dive, land, air, sea. I think we've got the best mission, to go out there and save lives. It's so much harder to save lives. It's easy to just kill somebody and pull the trigger and that's it. But to plug that hole and make a difference, that's the ultimate rush right there for me. PJs have this commonality because we all went through the same training. It's probably the toughest in the military. And you form that camaraderie even if it's a person you don't really care for. No matter what, you know that he's got your back and you've got his back. It's the same thing with the air crew. We're all one big team. We've got to look out for each other. What Kip Wise and Adrian Durham have found is a community into which they fit, into which they're accepted for who they are and for the job they can do. A community where their race, African American, is absolutely irrelevant. It is surely hyperbole to say the PJs turned their Jacobabad dump into heaven, but when one considers that the Army troops at K2 and most Air Force personnel at JBAD are living in tents while the PJs at both bases are living in relative comfort, indoors, enjoying life in the HAZ, there's a modicum of truth to what Durham says. So what is a HAZ? A HAZ is a hardened aircraft shelter. They can be found on military airfields around the world. Imagine a gigantic concrete bandshell, the rear of which might be burrowed into an earthen embankment. The opening is covered with huge doors as much as 3 feet thick, which are meant to be moved by powerful motors. Behind these doors is where an Air Force protects its fighter planes from enemy bombardment. The airfields that the United States is leasing at Karshai-Khanabad, Uzbekistan, K2, and Jacobabad, Pakistan, are sprinkled with these shelters. Now the doors are permanently open, the motors that move them in various states of decay. While the structures are no longer needed to protect aircraft, they offer a unique opportunity for upscale housing on these bases. And at their earliest opportunity, the PJs moved out of tents and into the HAZ, where they put their talents to work making life, if not good, then certainly less awful than it could be if they just had to make do with the basics. At Jacobabad, the PJs moved out of the hangar and away from its surrounding moat into one HAZ, then moved a second time into what they believed to be a more suitable HAZ. At both JBAD and K2, in order to keep out the elements, especially blowing sand and dust, the PJs put up wooden framing in the open doorway and built a huge wall of plywood. Inside the K2 HAZ, in addition to their combination day room, office, locked supply room, they have a 2-story structure of 8x8 cubicles, allowing each of the guys to have his own private room. Somehow, the PJs convinced an Army Reserve Engineering Battalion to do the basic construction work, which included wiring each of the rooms with AC power. The accommodations were so nice that the Army command that runs the base at Karshai-Khanabad tried to evict the pararescuemen and claim it for their own. At first, according to the guys, they were told that the reason they needed to vacate the HAZ was that it was sitting on radioactive waste. There is an area of the base that is indeed contaminated with radioactive material, but it's nowhere near the HAZ, and the PJs weren't buying the Army's act. Finally, when the effort to evict the PJs reached critical mass, so to speak, the guys pulled off their own little power play. They invited the Air Force commanders who were living in tents to move in and share the facility, recognizing that if the Army now tried to force them out of their HAZ, they'd be in a battle with at least 1 full colonel, 4 other field-grade officers, and a chief master sergeant. Problem solved. One room on the second floor at K2 has been made available for visitors, and the sign on the door identifies it as K2 Bed and Breakfast, while the adjacent cubicle is designated the Lieutenant John Shoemaker Suite. Shoe was the first combat rescue officer assigned to K2 and supervised construction. Guests at the B&B find their room furnished with a cot, sleeping bag, electrical outlet, and various toiletries donated by good-hearted American citizens who want to support their troops overseas. The room also comes with a printed History of the K2 Bed and Breakfast. It was a cool fall evening in 2002 when the idea for the bed and breakfast occurred to John Shoemaker. Inspired by the rolling hills covered by lush foliage and the expansive, silky beaches, he saw the potential for a virtual paradise here on Earth. With a keen eye for traditional decor, a taste for the finest in gourmet cuisine, and a desire for fine slumber on only the best bedding, he set in motion the blueprints that would become the world-renowned K2 bed and breakfast. Please feel free to relax on our tranquil beaches, take in a breath of fresh dirt, and enjoy the gourmet meals while taking in the magic that is Uzbekistan. The menu. Breakfast: Quaker oatmeal, Pop-Tarts, grape nuts, frosted mini-wheats, fresh fruit, assorted juices, coffee, or pork chop MRE number 12. Lunch: your choice of MRE. We're currently out of MREs 2, 19, 6, 13, 4, and 7. Dinner: our chefs scour the countryside for the freshest ingredients each day to bring you something delicious and exotic each night at the following hours, 1600 to 1900 local. Please, no hats in the dining facility, and with regard to breakfast, our senior airmen will deliver to your door. You'll note that neither aperitifs nor other alcoholic beverages are offered on the menu. This is definitely not an oversight, for as anyone who has met them knows, the PJs are a cultured group and have a deep appreciation of fine spirits, wines, and cigars. Staff Sergeant Rob Disney personally recommends the Rosemount Shiraz from southeastern Australia, which he says at $12 is a very good value. The reason there's no liquor served is the notorious General Order Number 1, which also prohibits materials that are pornographic or sexually explicit, as well as gambling throughout the entire war zone. It's been expanded upon by the Army commander at K2 to forbid sunbathing by female service personnel wearing bikinis. As one PJ observed, General Order Number 1 takes away everything good about being an American. Some elaboration is required on the prohibition of pornography. By definition handed down from commanders who feel the need to be deferential to the religious beliefs of some of the host countries, anything that shows completely exposed erogenous zones is considered pornographic. Thus, Playboy is verboten, but Maxim is not. Mullah Omar has probably not divined that distinction, but this is the military, and what the commanding general says, goes. Throughout the troop living areas at K2, the CG has thoughtfully placed amnesty boxes, into which conscience-stricken troops can conveniently deposit anything that might cross the panty line into contraband. Newly arrived Air Force personnel at Jacobabad are informed by old hands that the local interpretation of General Order Number 1 is that not only is porn prohibited, but sex is also disallowed. Leaving no investigative stone unturned, the details of that interpretation were sought, resulting in several interesting discoveries. One point of view expressed by certain pararescuemen holds that General Order Number 1 was intended to say, "Don't get caught" with booze, porn, or having sex. Some aircrew officers who try to use the fact that they're not PJs as ipso facto proof that whatever they have to say on the subject is credible, declare that there is indeed a prohibition on sex in the AOR, but add that the rule has a corollary which states, if sex is unavoidable, use a condom. Condoms are available at the BX. Further investigation determined that the corollary was not actually part of the general order, but was promulgated at a medical orientation lecture that included warnings about insect-borne diseases, heat stroke, and the need to avoid coming into close personal contact with the monitor lizards and cobras that also live on the base. At K2, the Army forbids visits by the opposite sex in tents between the hours of 2200 and 0800. The Air Force, however, has no such rule. Tents are assigned to entire flight crews, irrespective not only of gender, but rank. The reason is simple. Hard crewing, as it's called, keeps the same group of cockpit and back-enders together under the theory that people who fly together regularly make better, safer air crews. Also, because of crew rest requirements, it makes sense to have a crew that's flown together sleep in the same tent, undisturbed by the comings and goings of extraneous personnel who may be working different hours. But enough about sex. Back to the boys in the Has. At JBAD, as at K2, the pararescue detachment used as its raison d'etre to claim a Has the legitimate need to have a place to lock up narcotics and other medications, as well as an array of weaponry. Rather than a bi-level cubicle complex, however, they constructed a one-story apartment complex, then turned design and construction of improvements over to Staff Sergeant Tara Barrington. A millwright before joining the Air Force 5 years earlier, Tara got the nickname Bob Vila after proving himself adept at turning 2x4s and plywood into all sorts of creature comforts for what they describe as this old has. Tara enlisted when he was 22 after growing up in California's wine country, the son of an impoverished hippie mom. He decided he wanted to travel and see the world, and felt a compulsion to give something back to his country, which still surprises him, considering that the community in which he grew up was pretty much post-Vietnam hardcore anti-military. The Navy recruiter was his first stop, but after taking the required test, he decided he didn't like the Navy vibe. So he wandered down the hall to the Air Force officer and told the sergeant that he wanted to fly planes. Not having a college degree made that a non-starter. Tara didn't even understand the concept of officers and enlisted ranks, but the sergeant picked up his test results from the Navy office, came back and said, "You can do anything you want to do that's enlisted. You scored a 99. Barrington asked if that was good. The recruiter said, "That's 99 out of 99. That's when Tara discussed the kind of life he wanted with a visiting TAC-P who described himself as a radio operator attached to infantry or special ops units. And he said, "Well, you know what? If you really want to do something hardcore, don't be a TAC-P. You gotta go PJ." Despite the fact that he's only 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighs 145 if his hair is wet, the physical demands of becoming a PJ weren't daunting. He wasn't a jock in high school, just an all-around stud, whose lifestyle included a variety of outdoor sports. Mountain biking, hang gliding. I hang glide right now. That's kind of my dangerous pastime. And just being out in the woods. Hiking. I've done a few peaks. Shasta, Whitney. I don't do any technical stuff. Mount Whitney's the tallest peak in the U.S. I actually didn't summit Whitney. I got to about 11,000 feet and got altitude sick, but I've done Shasta twice, which is 600 feet lower. Swimming was a problem for him during INDOC. He claims to have barely passed the distance test in the time allotted. He also had a problem with sit-ups that caused him to get sent back to start the INDOC cycle over with the next group of candidates. He says he missed the minimum sit-up requirement by only 1 and fully expected the NCO to cut him some slack and click the counter an extra time or two because he was a good guy. No such luck. Ultimately, it took Barrington nearly 2 years to get through what is typically a 10-week INDOC followed by 15 months of the PJ pipeline. But he made it. Now he's the pull-up champ of the HAS, capable of doing 26, with his nearest competition, Lieutenant Rob Taylor and Staff Sergeant Rob Disney, reaching only the low 20s. Barrington is one of the guys who figured out the way to do an entire exercise routine in the back of a Herc. After realizing that they might spend 15 hours a day inside the aircraft and that it was cutting into their workout time, they began developing the mid-air routine. You can do back and by, you can do chest and try, and legs all in the airplane. We go up into the back, right into where the tail is in a V, and there's a couple of bars right there. You can do incline on the ramp, decline. You can jack your feet up on the benches, wide grip, narrow grip. That gives you a well-rounded chest exercise. And then the same thing with pull-ups, narrow grip, wide grip. To say he's smart understates the obvious, which makes one wonder why he didn't go to college. The short answer? He's an iconoclast who graduated at the bottom of his high school class. That compels the longer answer. I don't like homework. It's the whole rule thing. They want you to know that A plus B equals C. Then you're going to go home and you're going to write down A plus B equals C, B plus A equals C, C minus B equals A. And you're going to do that for 40 problems, a couple pages worth. You got an engine in your car that needs working on, a new exhaust system to put on, and the lawnmower to fix. You've got countless other projects going on in the meantime, and you know very well that A plus B equals C. You got that figured out, so why are you going to waste 2 hours out of your life to write it down a bunch of times? I was the top student in my classes and tests, but I wouldn't do my homework for a month. I have a fundamental belief. If it was a waste of time, I wasn't going to waste my time on it. So my grades suffered. That's just the way I am. This exposition on Barrington's attitude toward the regimentation of public school education in America comes on the heels of his elaborating on the rule thing as viewed by pararescuemen. We kind of don't belong in the military. My rule for being pararescue is break at least one rule a day. Never be in a uniform. If you are in a uniform, take it off at your earliest convenience, and make sure you're not wearing a perfect, proper uniform. Those are my rules. Is it braggadocio, or does he mean it? Either way, his elucidation on the subject caused a severe case of twitching in the Air Force PAO who was monitoring the conversation, ostensibly to protect the airmen from exploitation by the media person asking the questions. The PAO warned Barrington that his answers were being recorded, implying that perhaps he didn't want to be so forthcoming. He thanked her for her concern and indicated that the questioning should continue. What rule did you break today? It was already nearing midnight, and presumably he'd had an opportunity to fill his daily quota. He laughed. You want the whole list or just one? Well, let's see. Starting out, I didn't blouse my pants. Didn't wear a hat from the vehicle to the hangar. Didn't wear a seatbelt when I was driving. Exceeded the speed limit in the Humvee. I know I could think of some more. I probably broke a bunch on the quads. Four-wheel ATVs the PJs have rigged for parachute deployment. Considering that I crashed that one. Not wearing a helmet or shoes or gloves. No, I was wearing a helmet, but no eye protection, no gloves, and no shoes. Yeah, I broke a bunch of rules today. But it's stupid. We don't get in trouble. I hear a lot of people say that in other shops. I'm sort of like a liaison between PJs and the rest of the Air Force. That's my own personal thing, because I'm not the typical PJ. They all confide in me that if they did the same thing, they'd get in trouble.
And that was the first part of Chapter 3 from None Braver by Michael Hirsch. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.